Colleagues, friends, welcome to the inaugural lecture or inaugural seminar for this Amatole history seminar series. We are really excited to launch this. This is truly a great event. I think it's something that the history department has been wanting to do for a long time, and at last we have got the opportunity to do so. I would like to thank everyone that was involved in helping us. Most importantly, let me start there, is Ngabakazi Makwetu. You have been absolutely instrumental in joining this. You literally got us the first guest for the seminar series, so you are really the MVP here. And I'm very grateful for your support and for what you did. I mean, you basically organized this, so I'm really grateful. And then to the rest of the department, thank you very much for attending. Thank you very much for giving us this opportunity. I think that this seminar series has got the potential to go into new heights in terms of providing students as well as the people of the Eastern Cape an opportunity to listen to people that they would not necessarily have the opportunity to listen to. I think that this online platform provides quite a lot of inclusivity, and I'm really excited that we have the opportunity of also giving our postgraduates the chance to interact with people like Jacob, who have done the work, who have done the research, and can also share their knowledge system with our students. So that is why I think this is a passion project for both myself and Nge. We have been contemplating something like this for a while, and now I think it's finally coming off. Okay, so with no further ado, hand over to our HOD, our fearless leader, Dr. Kompi. Thanks, Doc.
Thank you very much, Program Director, my colleague Yako. I really appreciate us having this session. Let me first confirm whether you can hear me and see me.
See and hear you loud and clear, Doc,
great.
from my side.
Great. Thanks so much. You know, sometimes technology can be enemy number one, but thanks that I'm audible enough. Right, colleagues and ladies and gentlemen, I really am so excited that this process has now kick-started, and it is all thanks to Nge and Yako. But let me start perhaps by indicating, or rather looking at what inspired the idea of having these seminars. As Yako or Dr. Bezuidenhout has indicated, the idea started some time ago. I think even before my arrival here in 2019. It has always been our aim as a department to have such a seminar and to have seminar series. And the reason is that we want to, compare and benchmark ourselves with other institutions that are doing much better than our institution, and other history departments that are doing much better than us. And we believe that this is a stepping stone. But the deanery as well, the dean and his deputies also inspired us to think along the lines of having the seminar series. All thanks to them as well. Last year, in November, I think, November 2023, we had a very important meeting, the strategic planning workshop where this idea was discussed. And all of a sudden, Nge and Yako volunteered to spearhead and ensure that this takes place. You know, it is a very small department where there are only 2 permanent staff members, myself and Prof. Ulrich, and then Ms. Bureau Fesser, who is the NGAP person. The rest are the TOTs. Nge and Yako are the TOTs, or time on task lecturers. You can even say contract lecturers. But they ensured that this will take place, and this is an inaugural seminar series in a department, all thanks to them. And with those words being said, I want to take this opportunity, ladies and gentlemen, to welcome our special and first presentation of the newly established seminar series, Dr. Cloete. Welcome, sir. I also want to welcome and thank you for gracing this historical epoch in our department. Welcome to our students, our first cohort of students to experience this project. You are very important. The seminar is especially meant for you, and your presence here is highly valued. I know that there are still students that may perhaps struggle to join, but they will eventually succeed. Welcome to everyone. Welcome to my colleagues as well. My deputy, who will be introduced later. Without you and without other colleagues, this would not have been realized. I welcome everyone who made time in their busy schedule, not just the colleagues from Fort Hare University, but historians and scholars from elsewhere and from beyond the Department of History. Welcome. Enjoy the first session of our seminars. I'm not going to talk about the aims and objectives because I think Dr. Bezuidenhout made that very clear to us. Thank you once again and welcome. Over to you, Program Director.
Thank you, colleagues, for all those beautiful welcomes. They're much appreciated. So I'm just going to introduce Dr. Jacob Cloete. So Dr. Jacob Cloete is a filmmaker, photographer, and researcher at the University of the Western Cape. He graduated with his PhD in political science, focusing on political violence and post-colonial identities. His research feeds into a growing global scholarship on the politics of belonging, which is reflected in South Africa's xenophobic response and Europe's anti-immigration and anti-refugee policy. So he has presented papers at conferences, seminars, and workshops on various topics, including identity and belonging. He recently published the Attempted Erasure of the Khoekhoe and San, which investigates the attempted erasure of the Khoekhoe and San people and the problematic colored identity. Welcome, Dr. Jacob Cloete.
Colleagues, thank you very much. It's a great honor for me to be the first of this lecture or seminar series. Recently at UWC, I participated in their humanities seminar series, and I was once again reminded, as I'm reminded today, is that it's important for faculty staff and especially postgraduate students to sit together and sometimes discuss necessary research topics, and especially postgraduate students at the master's and a PhD level, and need that kind of integration with faculty, because if they get integrated early on in the research, then you find a very robust environment in which research ideas can flourish. So thank you very much. So I appreciate this opportunity. Dr. Kompi, Dr. Nge, and Dr. Jaco, thank you very much
for this opportunity. I will share my slides and then I will go through it. I prepared the slides with a master's and PhD student in mind, if you guys don't mind. So it's on the book, but I thought that I would like to use this opportunity to also engage some issues that we find in the current academic environment and how students, especially at master's level, they can use that to their benefit and join the debates.
Colleagues, can everyone see this?
There we go. We got it.
Yes, thanks.
Right, we can go to the next slide, Jaco.
Okay.
All right, so the book, the Attempted Erasure of the Khoekhoe and San, it was inspired by 3 events. The first event was the Rhodes and Fees Must Fall movements in 2015. And as you would know, colleagues, the Fees Must Fall and Rhodes Must Fall movements asked for the decolonization of higher education. At that point, I don't think a lot of people understood the task which the students propel the university and especially high institutions think about. But as we over that 2015, 2016, 2017 started making sense of this particular movement, that we saw that there is a lot at stake, and they're not just calling for fees that must fall, but we have to look at curriculums. We have to look at how people are written in specific textbooks, etc. So with that in mind, I decided, okay, and at that time I was busy with my PhD. I need to think differently about the African subject. The second event was the screening of a film, a documentary film, at the Center for Humanities Research at the University of the Western Cape. And while the film was received quite, people liked the film. I didn't like the film very much because of the portrayal of Black children in particular. And I'm not talking about politically Black children that include Indian and colored people, but I talk about Black children from the informal settlement of Nkaneng, where the Marikana massacre took place. And in the film, Black children was used as props to kind of invoke empathetic response. I didn't like it. It didn't sit well with me. So I raised my concerns. But then the rest of the academics and the people in that screening couldn't see what I was seeing. They couldn't see the structural violence. The third event that inspired the book was growing up in Amakuland. So Amakuland is a region that stretches from the Western Cape all the way up into Namibia. So I grew up in the South African side of Namaqualand, and my grandmother was from the Kamiesberg, and my grandfather was from the Bushmanland. So the two of them negotiated their lives there. But I was raised in a Khoekhoe identity, and my first education was that of how to read plants, how to read tracks, just to read read in a different way. But the moment I joined the university, that information that my parents gave me, that reading of their way of reading was regarded as backward and savage, and because of that, systematically over time, it started getting erased from me, but not completely erased. It just pushed into the back of my mind. But it's once I was again in the university, and especially around the Fees Must Fall movements and the Rose Must Fall movements, that the memory of my grandparents and especially their teachings awaken itself. So those are the three events that inspire the book. Next slide, please. So the book is about the problematic colored identity, and this problematic colored identity started, or the official classification started in 1828 in preparation of the freeing of slaves or enslaved people in South Africa. So it's the first time there was ever racial classification in South Africa in 1828, and it was with Ordinance 50. And it created only two groups, racial groups. There was the European group, and then you had the colored group. And the colored group included not just the so-called mixed Khoekhoe or mixed groups, mixed black people, but it includes different groups of black people, and it includes the Khoekhoe and San groups in it. And over time, systematically, people, especially that of Khoekhoe and San ancestry, they were bureaucratically erased. As you guys will see on the photo there shows a birth and a death register. So this is from the Genadendal Moravian church. So if you look at at Genadendal in specific, and the book goes in more detail at what I'm going to share here, that you will see is that Khoekhoe and San people were forced to missionary areas, and there they were Christianized, or they were civilized. They had to take on Christian faith, and then they were baptized. So you would see there's on one of his race and occupation, there's Hottentot. Now Hottentot is the older naming of the Khoekhoe people, but at the bottom you would see there's mix, and that mix is not a mixed person, but it's a mixed Hottentot. And if you go through all of these death and birth registers, you will see over time, all of these people that were classified as Hottentot or as mixed Hottentot, they become colored over time. So there was this bureaucratic erasure. So when we get to 1950 with the Population Registration Act, you have three racial groups in South Africa. You had colored people, you had black people, and you had white people. So that was the racial spectrum. But the one thing that people do not take into consideration is that almost every indigenous group, whether we Xhosa, Tswana, Sotho, and even Zulu, at one point in South Africa's history was colored, classified as colored, and the colored identity had subcategories. So currently there's a situation that the majority of colored people in South Africa is of indigenous background, but those indigenous backgrounds are not recognized by a racial piece of legislation. So, but the more important thing that happened and why it took place is the objectification and the extermination of the Khoekhoe and San. Now, when I talk about objectification, is turning something in an object, to remove the subject from that person, to remove the self, the human from that person. So once you objectify something, then it's easier to obliterate and exterminate that specific thing. And that happened to the Khoekhoe and San, and I'm dealing with in a book with it. But it happened to almost every other indigenous group across the African continent, as this objectification of the group. They turn this group into a thing, and then because it's a thing, then it's easier to exterminate. And then there was the taxonomy, the renaming of places, the renaming of plants, the renaming of animals. And systematically, there was this appropriation of the Khoekhoe and San, their knowledge, their being, their culture, their religion, everything was appropriated. Next slide. So the erasure of the Khoekhoe and San people, the universities also played a role in the attempted erasure of the Khoekhoe and San people. So, as you would be aware, colleagues, is that the South African University was created as a racialized entity. So from 1959 onwards, with the University Extensions Act, historically black universities was started. So universities was created specifically for specific racial groups. I think the University of Fort Hare was, I know Walter Sisulu was a black university, and the University of Zululand was an ethnic university for Zulu and Swazi people. And then you had a university like UCT or Stellenbosch was white and Wits for white people. And then you only had one university that was for colored people, which was the University of the Western Cape. So if you look at that picture that I gave you there, it says unrest grows at mixed university. And if you read that, then you say keep South Africa's colored and mixed race students separate and quiet, but it has not done so. So even though there was universities that was classified in specific racial entities, they rejected it from early onwards. And the University of the Western Cape was one of those universities that heavily got involved in the Black consciousness movement and the rejection of a racialized university. And the book goes into that moment. I think chapter 5 and chapter 6 deals with that specific reality. Is that there comes a moment when Jake Scherwel opens the University of the Western Cape and said this is going to be the University of the Left, and for the first time opens the university to all races, and it led to the defunding of the university. And that defunding of the university over, I think, a decade or so, slowly but surely led to university in almost bankruptcy, which they faced in 2001. So there was this rejection of a racialized entity. So that's the one moment. So what I do in the book is, how does Feast Must Fall and Rhodes Must Fall then speak and critique or give us a different understanding of history? Does history repeat? And why does history repeat? So that's kind of the type of questions that I'm dealing in chapter 5 and 6 in the book. But the universities in this racialized entity also participated in the objectification, extermination, not just in Khoekhoe and San people, but every indigenous group on the African continent. And this objectification is that creating specific characters of the group of people, and then develop a monolithic reading of that group of people. So these people can't go out of that. So then you get very racist or offensive notions of a specific group is a specific group because they do this. And that becomes offensive because the African subject then has to be stuck in history, in a specific time in history that was objectified by through coloniality. And if they don't stuck in that mode, then they get exterminated, then it doesn't exist. So that objectification is then almost like these people have to perform their oppression continuously just to be recognized that they are indeed that group of people. And the Khoekhoe and San people is a specific case in South Africa about that. And then the universities help with the erasure using taxonomy. So most of the flora and fauna in South Africa has Latin names. The indigenous names sometimes is there, but many of them are taken away from them. For example, eland is Kana in the Khoekhoe and San language, but you rarely use that nowadays in even anymore. So there's I think there's a municipality in the Western Cape, if I'm correct, called Kanaland. And I don't think a lot of people know that Kanaland actually means the land of plenty eland. But that is where the name comes from. If we take a place like Tsitsikamma in the Eastern Cape, then Tsitsikamma means a place of troubled waters, almost like boiling waters. You get a place in the Western Cape or a region that we call Outeniqua, and it's not even Outeniqua like people pronounce it in Afrikaans. It's Outeniqaus. Outeniqaus meaning O means old, Tani means honey, and Kaus means people, meaning the people from the place with old honey. So that's then the translation of what people call Outeniqua. So taxonomy, the renaming of places and things, contributed to that specific erasure. And then after the erasure, if the group doesn't exist anymore, or the place doesn't exist anymore, then that place or that thing can be appropriated. For example, if you see a piece of Khoekhoe and San arrow or something somewhere, you can pick it up. If you see a spear from the Zulu nation, you can pick it up. It's your belonging, but it literally owns to a group of people. But you can take it because that group doesn't exist anymore. Next slide, please. But it's not just the universities. Museums also play a big role in the erasure of the Khoekhoe and San. And what the museum successfully does is to keep Khoekhoe and San people, or the imagination of the world of the Khoekhoe and San people, in a specific way. And if they don't encounter that specific way that museums present, then they are disappointed, and the legitimacy of that people are rejected. So it's the universities that create this charactered versions of the Khoekhoe and San people. So some museums still have the Bushman diorama, like the one in Uppington where I took this photo. This is supposed to be a Korana kraal. A Korana is a group of Khoi people. So the naming of this is a little piece of naming, say this is a Korana kraal. So if someone comes from Europe, they want to see the specific image because this is what the museum give them. And then if you look at books, popular media, films and things, then you would see there's a specific way of being indigenous person, whether that is Khoekhoe San, Zulu, Xhosa, you have to be that way. And that is what people expect. Museums also are the owners, or they have ownership over human remains of indigenous people. For example, the museum in Montague owned the skull of Kusas. In another museum, I can't get to that museum now, owned the skull of Hinsa. And what is problematic, that this is literally humans, as human remains. That's someone's father, that was someone's lover, that's someone's king. It was a person at one point, but the skull objectifies that group of people and it dehumanizes them. And it's not a mold, it's not something that they've made. That is literally the skull of a human being. And it's with multiple eyes see them and have this gaze on them. And that gaze objectifies a group of people. So the one thing that we have to start thinking about is what must museums do with human remains that they still have of indigenous people of Africa. And then there's the ownership of cultural and spiritual objects. So this particular museum in Uppington, they are full of pottery, they're full of spears, they're full of beads, people's property they have. But those people were killed during the Kham people's genocide, the Bushman, the Kham, when they were killed. All of those things were taken and they became the properties of the people who killed them, which in turn either donate them to museums as works of collection, or they were paid. It was sold to museums, and that's how it becomes the property. Next slide, please. So then the question is, what does it mean to decolonize? Because the book that I wrote was meant to be a decolonized text. It was supposed to take a difficult conversation, a difficult topic like the problematic colored identity, and then have another reading of colonial texts. But when you read this colonial text, you have to look at it differently. And if you have to look at it differently, you cannot stay in one specific discipline. And currently, this is the thing, is that we all divided into, especially in the university, we all divided into discipline. And there's rarely intra and interdisciplinary work. I was lucky to be exposed to the Center for Humanities Research, who focus on inter and interdisciplinary work, but not a lot of students are that lucky. So if you look at this particular book, it touches on philosophy, it touches on ideological. So there's a conversation on Hegel. There's a conversation that I have on rock art. There's a conversation that I have with Fanon and Judith Butler. Judith Butler being heavily engaged in psychology. And so I have a conversation with Fanon, Judith Butler, and Khoekhoe on how a subject is created and how subjection and power stays in. But I bring an African scholar into the conversation and do something completely different and give a decolonized reading of it. So I engage politics, I engage history. So the book is a interdisciplinary text. Now, one of the things that I had to fight with the reviewers, because this is an academic book and it was peer reviewed, is that when it was sent to reviewers, in many cases, it was read in a disciplinary view. Which brings me to the second issue, is the question of form and style, because reviewers would say, this is not how you write the history, or this is not how you write politics. This is not the form. You will have to write it in a more academic way of understanding. And I had to kind of push back to reviewers and say that a decolonized text needs to be written in a decolonized form. So my book takes the form of a documentary film, which is there's Act 1, there's Act 2, and there's Act 3, and 2 chapters is dedicated to each of the act. So it starts off slowly and then it builds up to a climax and then it drops. But that was to engage the reader. But I didn't only just engage the reader, I left some interesting things for the reader. 4 of the chapters of the book, chapters 2, 3, 4, and 5, is documentary films that I've made, which is supplementing the book. So that is, in a sense, decolonial. The book can be used for academic purposes, but then the documentary films can be used for discussions, but also reach a broader audience than just the academic audience. So the question of form and style is something that you have to take into consideration when you want to write a decolonized text. And sometimes you have to stand your ground on form and style, especially if the book is a interdisciplinary text. And then there's the question of method. One of the reviewers didn't want to pass the book because it doesn't have a methodology section. So I had to explain in detail and quite lengthy the methodology that I use, and that the methodology was sound. So I use auto-ethnographic approach, but I also created, based on my experience with documentary filmmaking, I created a conceptual framework that would unmask coloniality what in text. Because from my work from documentary filmmaking, I've realized that there's 3 inherent limitations to documentary filmmaking. The first is the selectiveness of the frame. The selectiveness of the frame means is that the camera cannot see as wide as the eye see. So it frames in a specific way, and it cuts out the corners and the top of the view. So when you present this photograph to someone or this video to someone, then someone would think that is the complete picture. But what the people doesn't take into consideration, outside the frames, there was action taking place. And it's that action sometimes that give more context to what is framed in the photograph. The second limitation is the subjectivity of the audience. Every person who reads a book or watches a film has its own experience, subjective experiences. And it's with that experiences, if you're a reviewer, if you're a senior professor, if you're the expert in a field, you still have subjective experiences. And sometimes those subjective experiences inform how you approach a specific topic. And then the third limitation was the invisibility of the filmmaker. In many occasions in documentary filmmakers, the filmmaker has to be invisible, it must not be seen. So the audience get manipulated that there was no filmmaker or there wasn't the crew behind filming that particular thing. And the same with books. Sometimes in the classic academic text, you write yourself out of the text. It's supposed to be objective. And even if you do that, rarely you achieve complete objectivity in your reading. Even in the natural scientist scientific method, you still had to subjectively choose the formula that you most favor, and that is subjectivity at heart. So with that 3 limitations, I was able to use that and unmask coloniality within various texts. And that's the conceptual framework that I put into the methodology. And then I did discourse analysis. So that was the layers of methodology that I use. But then there's also issues like that I had to deal with is how do you treat and approach indigenous knowledge? As a chapter 2 of the book deals with indigenous knowledge, especially rock art. And I had to go in and critique some of the leaders on rock art studies, because the way it was written is that rock art sites and rock arts in particular are written as paintings, as symbols, and rarely as art. Art is the same level as that as any Western or European art. So that's the one thing. So if we then look at the collection of rock art, then it becomes an archive. But the rock art site itself is an archive. So if you apply archaeology and you start digging, then you would see there's layers of human history at that particular site. So then if you approach rock art differently and you approach it as an archive, then there's a different philosophical reading of the art itself. And that was lacking within the mainstream reading of rock art. So we have to then treat rock art differently. So and that's a question that we have to work, especially when you deal with indigenous knowledge. You have to find different ways of engaging it, because Western, sorry for that, there's a plane flying over. So Western philosophical text, unfortunately, doesn't have the tools to understand or analyze indigenous knowledge. And then the final thing when it comes to decolonization is, what does it mean to be African in discourse? As a person of Khoekhoe and San ancestry, especially Nama and Griqua ancestry, it's heartbreaking to read about some of the accounts in terms of how these people were killed and studied. The genitalia of a Nama woman, how it was studied by Leonard Schulze during the Nama and Herero genocide. We see the pictures of the Nama and Herero genocide, and it becomes extremely emotional for you to engage this, because you know that you literally encounter yourself. But then what it also means to be African in discourse is that you rarely find authoritarian figures that journals and publishing houses favor when you engage this. So journals and publishing houses would refer or give your work to a reviewer that will bring up the same people that you are trying to dislodge a specific view. And if you don't do it, then you don't get published. So these are the questions that we have to ask ourselves. Next question, next slide, please. So, and this is what I'm currently busy with. What I'm currently busy with is developing a pre-colonial imagination. So I've shared with you how museums treat the African subject. It's in a specific way, it's objectified, and you have to stay like that. If you're not like that, then you lose your legitimacy. So the pre-colonial imagination doesn't even exist, because the colonial imagination is that what we encounter in museums. The pre-colonial imagination is more troubling than the colonial imagination, because the pre-colonial imagination would say that colonialism erased a shared history. It will treat especially the Xhosa and the Khoekhoe people in the Eastern Cape differently. They would see that the Khoekhoe and the Xhosa people were related, that they lived together, and that they had same practices. For example, if you take Makanda, Makanda was both Khoekhoe and Xhosa. And if you take David Stearman, and David Stearman was also Khoekhoe and Xhosa. The one Makanda chose his Xhosa ancestry, and David Stearman chose his Khoekhoe ancestry. That doesn't mean that they're not related. So the pre-colonial imagination is troublesome for many of the things that we currently believe of the groups that we encounter in Africa. So what colonialism did, erased a shared indigenous memory, and it segregated them into race and ethnicity. The Khoekhoe people were erased. Many of them was included into colored, and a lie was told to them is that you are colored, Xhosa people are black, you don't have any relationship with them. You are mixed, but that's a lie. A pre-colonial imagination would treat identity as fluid. And the other thing is, in Africa, we are not allowed to have a pre-colonial identity, but a pre-colonial identity is encouraged in Europe and in the East, like places like China. They have great pre-colonial imaginations. They write their own stories from a pre whatever civilization they have. But in Africa, we are not supposed to have it because we are objectifying in a specific way. So what this does, it dehumanizes people. So what I'm currently trying to look at is to rehumanizing and dislodging Africans from coloniality, trying to help and develop a pre-colonial imagination to look for a shared indigenous history and memory, then a segregated history of people. Next slide. And the reason why I'm doing that is because I want to rescue the future. And when I mean I want to rescue the future, I don't want Black children to be used in the future as tropes of pity, pain, and suffering. I want Black children to be portrayed the same way a white child would be portrayed, a person or being that has agency, that is not subject to pity, pain, and suffering. I want to rescue the future to liberate the African subject from discourse. When you encounter the African subject, it's always a specific way in discourse, and you have to write that African subject a specific way in discourse. And then the final thing is, I want us to focus on a common shared African identity that is inclusive of all groups currently on the African continent, and that include white people. I believe is that white people can be as African as black or any other group in South Africa. For if we take the Afrikaners specifically in South Africa, they've always almost been here for 400 years. So how long have you have to be or have to be on a continent before you can have that common shared African identity? So that is my attempt to rescue the future. Last slide. So Kegangans, that is in Nama. I see the South Africa, Kabakazi sent me that they have a dictionary now. Well done to them. That is in the Nama language, or the Khoekhoe Go-Up, which means the language of the Khoekhoe people, Kegangans. Thank you very much. Over to you.
Wow, Dr. Cloete, thank you very, very much. That was absolute. I think we couldn't have asked for a better inaugural seminar than the one that you just delivered. I think I speak on behalf of everyone that was present. This was extremely interesting, truly something food for thought for all of us. I would like to, before I get into an eloquent serenading of singing your praises, I would like to open the floor up for any questions. I think we open the floor up for about 15 minutes for anyone who might have questions for Dr. Cloete. I'm biting at the bit to ask and to give comment myself, but I think it's only fair that I open the floor for everyone else. I see Prof. Ulrich has got her hand up. Nicole, go ahead.
Hi, thank you so much, Dr. Cloete. It's really fantastic having you at our university. And thank you so much for speaking, also very much addressing our postgraduate students, and also sort of speaking about really important aspects that will impact on them as well as intellectuals around publication. Thank you very much for that. And that speaking back is allowed and is encouraged. So thank to reviewers, to editors, that type of thing. Thank you so much. For me, I was really very interested in the issue around Indigenous languages and the way in which you spoke about renaming. And what I'm really interested in is sort of these languages that are almost lost. They're part of this erasure. If there's any attempt to sort of integrate that into academic work, even if it's through poems or quoting extensively from these languages, to start integrating them back sort of into our present day normal usage. So if you could please speak to me about your journey with the language in particular. And then secondly, perhaps related to that, if you can discuss the category that you did mention very briefly of Bushmen, and that it's a very, very difficult category for historians to work with. So if you can please just give us some of your thoughts on that.
All right, Tom. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you, Prof. I appreciate those two questions. So let me start with the language issue. So my grandmother passed away in 2010, the 26th of August 2010. And the moment she passed on, everything that she taught me vanished. I couldn't recall anything that she taught me. It was almost like the memory didn't exist, but I know she taught me stuff. And in 2020, I signed up for the introductory course of the Khoekhoe Go-Up, or the Khoekhoe language that is done by UCT, to study the language that my grandmother could speak a bit or know a lot of the phrases of the language. And from that moment, I started learning the language again, the language that my grandmother know a bit, but that of my forefathers. Everything that she taught me came back to me. It's almost like the floodgate could open, and I start dreaming of her again. So language is quite important, and I delve a little bit in a book when it comes to language, especially if we look at archives like the Valellum Blake and Lucy Lloyd archive. or on the Kham language that nobody speaks in South Africa anymore. It's written, the orthography exists, there's poems and books on it, there's notebook full of it, but nobody can speak the language anymore. But the language is not dead, it's just nobody can speak it. It's written. So I speak about this in the book, saying is that the people that taught Lloyd and Blake this language had to speak the early form of Afrika of Afrikaans, which is kitchen Dutch at that particular point, to Lloyd and them, which then had to translate it into English. So we had this triple translation that took place. So a lot of the meaning and things got lost, the nuances, the cultural nuances. And it's the same thing that I found when I have to transcribe a documentary from that I shot in Afrikaans. Suddenly, it loses, the moment you start translating it, it loses the oomph, the cultural nuances that comes with it. So what I'm trying to do is people to use indigenous languages in their work, in their studies, and treat it as philosophical concepts. Because if every word that is formed in indigenous language have an indigenous philosophy behind it. So if we can approach it like that, then we can integrate the languages into academic discourse, and not just social sciences. It also applies for the natural sciences. So I encourage it. But here's the problem. The second last slide or third last slide are talking about developing a pre-colonial imagination. It's important that we start writing stories, novels, books in that specific language or the various languages, so that the languages start living again. If we don't use the languages on the same level that you find that with English, then unfortunately the language will die. So recently I went to some of the bookstores in Cape Town looking for something that is written in beginner Setswana. I couldn't find anything. And that's the problem. The problem is I couldn't find anything. It's not that I wanted to learn the language because my best friend speak the language, but I couldn't because there's nothing available. And there's nothing available that is of significant value online. So that's where I say we would start. The second issue with the Bushman and San, both terms is acceptable, but both terms can also offend people. So the best way is to ask which people they prefer. I know the Kalahari, people in the Kalahari, they don't prefer the term son because the term son is quite offensive. It means vagabond. It's something derogatory naming that the number gave a group of people. A son, which is the opposite of Khoekhoe. So Khoekhoe means proper human being. So son is the opposite of proper human being. So the best is to ask people what they prefer. If they prefer Bushman, then you use Bushman. If they prefer son, then you use son.
Thanks,
Thank
Doc.
you.
Thank you, Prof, for those questions. Dr. Mokatsi Taps, have you got a question?
Dr. Besedinhout, thank you. Dr. Cloete, I wish to ask you a question, two questions rather, and I'll be very quick. The first one is on the question of Afrikaners being Africans, the way we categorize Africans. You reminded me of what Ali Mazrui said about how he categorized the Afrikaners in South Africa. He said there are two types of Africans, Africans by blood and Africans by soil. So those who were born here and those who got the land here. So in your way of making sense of the very statement that you made, what is your take on that? So do you see them as Africans without any further categorization, or would you also adopt the very categorization that Ali Mazrui employed? And then secondly, I wish to know what inspired the title of your book. Because the more I look, the more I read, or the more I see the title of your book, the more I wish I am asking myself, maybe you should have said the erasure of the code of the erasure instead of the attempted erasure. But the way you speak, it sounds like there's a reason behind every word. You sound like someone who's very careful with the wording. So I'm just curious to know, what is the thinking behind every single title? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mokachi, for that. Let me start with the first question. Are Afrikaners African by soil or blood? Every human being on this continent, I believe, is African by soil. If we follow, like I personally do, I follow origins started in Africa, and then we have two types of migration: one out of Africa and one in Africa. I think one of the maps that I showed there is a migration inwards between what later became San groups, so-called Ngoni groups, and so-called Khoi groups. So that is kind of the downward south migration from a common point of origins, and then you have the one that's north out of Africa. And not a lot of people talk about this types of migration because they think Africa was separated from the rest of the world for centuries, but it's only from 1857. So I think in Zimbabwe and in South Africa, you get a group called the Lemba, and the Lemba shared DNA with the Jewish people in the Middle East, and the Lemba people also have a similar culture as the Jewish people, and it shows that type of migration, and people doesn't get into it. So is the Lemba African, or is it Jewish? Is the Middle Eastern? Where do you fit them? So if we look at the archaeological evidence, the archaeological evidence, and we do proper DNA tests, everything comes back to Africa. So I would say they are Africans by blood and by soil. The issue is, and this is the thing that we try to step around, there's an issue of redressing a historical injustice. And addressing this historical injustice, we have to kind of un-Africanize a group of people that was born on this continent because they benefited from an oppressive system. The Tutsi also benefited from an oppressive system, and you can go on the continent and you can pick different groups of people that benefited from colonialism. So the issue really on the African continent is, what do we do about the historical injustice? But I don't think making a group of people un-African is solving that issue. I think we must get straight to the point and talk about the historical injustice and how can we do something about the historical injustice. So that would be my response to that one. And then the title, you are so right. Every word of this book is really carefully chose. I've read this book so many times and I've changed sentences so many times because I don't want to, because it's such a sensitive topic. So the title, I wanted the title, the first title was The Attempted Erasure of the Khoekhoe and San. And then I looked at the title and say, but the title would sound better if it's the erasure of the Khoekhoe and San. And then I got stopped by my dear friend, Dr. Lorato Mokwena, saying that the power of your book is in attempted, because it's an erasure that was not successful. And that's the subtext of the whole book. Like a film, the subtext of my book is the attempt that wasn't successful.
Oh, interesting. Before I get to Mr. Ndlovu, Ayanda, I just want to read this to you, Doc, just in case you can't see it. It's from Joe Jafta, who left something in the chat box. He says, "Thanks, Dr. Cloete. I've recently reclaimed my Khoisan identity and find your work very interesting and deeply encouraging to note the academic interest in reviving and ensuring the survival of our indigenous knowledge and systems. I work closely with the Eastern Cape Khoisan task team and would like us to explore engaging with you going forward."
So my response to him is anytime. My contact details is what you guys, so you can share it.
Great. Yeah, we'll share not just your contact details, but also a link to purchasing this book, which I think everyone that attended this would be very keen to do, including myself. I'm definitely going to procure a copy. Let me get to Mr. Ndlovu. Ayanda, are you there?
Yes, I'm here.
Go for it.
Yes. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you very much for the opportunity to Dr. Cloete, and thank for the presentation. But I have two questions. Mine relates to heritage, because I'm also a heritage practitioner. So the first one would be that because I saw that you also touch on rock art. So my question would be, when you were also critiquing the rock art, were you able to consider the engraved text in rock engravings rather than using the archaeological scientific approach such as excavation? Then the second question would be, how do you then negotiate the question of history and heritage, because these are still much more interesting and intersecting concept. And I say this simply because I also heard you mentioning about the object which are reserved into museums. And I know that SARA under repatriation and restitution, they are also doing some work on that, on bringing those kind of object back. So those are just two questions I had. Thank you.
Can you repeat the last one?
The last one is
the history and heritage question.
How do you negotiate the question of history and heritage? Simply because part of what it's taught or it's within the museums informs part of heritage. And also, how do you then identify in terms of maybe locating or giving it back to communities of which these objects were taken from, given the fact that some of these things predate, long time ago?
100%, I got it. So let me start with the first. How do you treat the rock art? And I would encourage you to read chapter 2 of my book, because chapter 2 deals with rock art in a very interesting way. I first read J.D. Lewis, Williams, and then I read John Parkington, because they use three approaches to analyze rock art. The one is the interpretive approach, then there's another two approaches, and I can't get to it. And what it does, it essentializes images to tell a specific story. And in most of these cases, absent is a larger set of questions that we have to consider. And one of those questions that we have to consider is this a painting done by a backward group of people, or is this art done by a sophisticated group of people? And my question to that answer is that there is so much sophistication in the pre-colonial preservation of Southern Africa by various indigenous groups. So if we look at 1652 as a moment in South Africa, in the history of Southern Africa, then you will see the natural environment is attacked and impacted the same way as human beings are. So 100 years later, 150 years later, you suddenly have to have conservation. You have to scale down on the level of poaching, killing of indigenous plants, animals, and now we only have a few of those places left, and those are the places of sun parks. But almost for 80,000 years, Southern Africa had this plenty of wildlife, and what the indigenous groups find a way, was a sophisticated way of living in nature, in with nature, than being a human in nature, a human with a house. So if you look at the structures of the Khoekhoe and San, then you would see they use removable huts, which is very environmental friendly. So if we start looking at that technology with our modern eyes, then we see actually they have solved the problems. Many the trying things that we try and do now with sustainable development was solved by indigenous groups of people in Africa thousand years ago. So then to return to the rock art question, my answer to your question is that, and this is the answer that I give in the book, is that we don't have the philosophical means yet to understand rock art in its fullest. It's only when we really sit down and look at the African philosophy that can explain rock art that we'll get to that answer. And I think Suleiman Bashir Jian started on that journey when he started looking at African art as philosophy. And then your second question is, how do you negotiate between history and heritage? For me, is that yes, there's supposed to be heritage, and I know the grading system of heritage treat heritage in terms of objects. It's objects that needs to preserve. So that's why human remains is objectified. My issue is what spiritual, cultural, and human remains. Do they have to be in museums, or do they have to be part of heritage? How can we in modern times use modern technology to still make these things available to people, but we don't have to display it to groups of people? Let me put it differently. Do we have to display the skulls of Kusas and Hinsa to the descendants of Kusas and Hinsa? If we can answer that question, then we would answer your question.
Thanks, Doc. I hope I hope Ayanda, I hope your question has been answered, even though it has been answered with a question. But yeah, I think it's a question worth taking deeply and pondering about it. If there are no more questions from anyone else, I'd like to also chip in and abuse my powers as convener of ceremonies in asking. Okay, there is a question just before I get involved. There is a question from Mr. Zibi Mzoa. Go for it.
Oh, greetings, good day everyone. So, okay, Doc, I would just like to, I just want to ask on the thing that you mentioned of identity, a pre-colonial identity. And then my question is it possible and then to bring back those memories or to maintain or to conserve the identity that we had and then even before we born? Because now I consider the fact that now and then all the tribes is like are mixed. There is no place that where you can find only a Xhosa or you find a Zulu alone. There's a mix. And then even if another question is, and then you also said that maybe we can in the education systems and then write or read something about that language. But my question is it's not that maybe that language, if we put it in academic, is going to also contaminate it or is going to be ruined, because there's some of the additions that are going to be put is not going to be the same. I don't know whether you hear properly what I'm just wanted to ask.
I got it. So let me start with your first one with languages. I'm not saying that it needs to be contaminated, and I understand what you mean. A watered down version of the language. What I want, indigenous languages like isiZulu, isiXhosa, Setswana, I want them to reach the same level as English and Afrikaans. And the only way to reach the same levels of English and Afrikaans is to start developing academic texts in that and teach people it. So mathematics, we must be able to teach it in any of these indigenous languages, and the same as chemistry, business, and all of this. And it must not only be at a high school level, it must be at a university level, at the undergrad level. You must be able to teach mathematics in isiZulu, in a master's and PhD level. And then you need to develop textbooks at that specific level. So it becomes then part of it. So that is what I'm trying to tell. It's only when we start using this language and develop this language further that we will keep it from keep them from extinction. The first question you ask is it possible to bring back the memories and identities? And then you mentioned something that all tribes are mixed. So in my book, talk about the fluidity of identity, and I explain the fluidity of identity. And this is the big issue that I'm trying to get people to understand, is that identity became racialized and fossilized from colonialism onwards. Colonialism and apartheid created fossilized identities that you define yourself in terms of ethnicity and in terms of race. But fluid identities still do exist in Africa, and especially in South Africa. So recently, a year ago, my best friend, Tsepo Twala, married his sweetheart, Kamogelo. Kamogelo, is a Tswana woman, and Tsepo is a Swati man. And they married. Hilabolat and Kamo was accepted into Swati culture. So the issue is that Tsepo's children, Tsepo and Kamo's children is going to be Swati. So they're going to have a fluid identity, or they're going to have fluid. So that's an example of fluid identities. So fluid identities existed in Africa for a very long time. And it's not one incident, it's all incidents. So this is what I want us to start focusing on, is more the fluidity of identities, and try and move out of its racialized meaning of identities. So I'm not trying to bring back archetypes of identities and memories. I'm just thinking, how can we return to a pre-colonial fluidity? Thank you.
Thanks, Doc. I'd also just like to note that Mr. Zibi Mzwa is my master's student, and he's currently busy with research on land claim, and that's why the talk of your talk now, I'm sure will inspire him quite a lot with his research going forward, as his tie-in with land and identity is very much tied into his own research. So this, I think, your theoretical approach to it will inspire him, and I'm sure that he will also get a copy of your book as well.
I hope so.
That I know I was going to give a comment, but I think it's only fair that I give another opportunity for the people waiting and have their hands up. I've got Mr. Kaluza who's got his hand up. Mzu, go for it.
Good afternoon, colleagues. Thank you, Dr. Cloete, for the presentation you have made. I'll first start with a comment and then end with a question. So I was quite touched by your last slide, where you mentioned about the idea of having a common shared African identity. To me, that means that we still have more discussion as a country, considering that we are a diverse society, which I think for us to maybe to get into the stage of a common African identity, we need to have such discussions with the purpose of reaching that goal of having that African identity. And then my question will be based on your, I think it was slide 6 on the pre-colonial imagination, and I want to link it maybe with the theme or topic of maybe migration or forced removals per se, in terms of when you think about the pre-imagination, the pre-colonial, developing a pre-colonial imagination prior the arrival of the colonists. Do you also look at the aspect of conflicts within the societies that were living at that time? Because I would say, as Africans, yes, we may have had our own conflicts prior the arrival of the colonists. So do you also look at the aspect of the conflict within the societies or the communities which were living at the time? Thank you so much.
All right. Thank you for that first comment. I agree with you. We need to have a discussion, and I just want to put a disclaimer. It's not my idea. It's an idea that I'm taking up, that former President Thabo Mbeki, 1996, put on the table with his "I'm an African" speech, and I think is I'm an African speech. We need to have a different look at it, have another look at it. The book also ends. The book ends with the chapter on his speech. I'm an African. To get to your question, how did conflict shape pre-colonial, and did I look at it? I looked at forced migrations and land dispossession from 1652 onwards, and showed in the book how the Khoekhoe and San later ended up on missionary societies. So I per se didn't look at pre-colonial conflicts, but I did look at also resistance against colonial forces. But it's not something that I intentionally want to give attention to in my book. And the reason why is because my PhD was so heavily focused on how pre-colonial imaginations of conflict later created this Hutu and Tutsi post-colonial imagination that led to the 1994 genocide. And I was tired of that type of violence, and I didn't want to do it in this particular book. So I didn't look at it in that specific way.
Awesome, thank you, Doc. If there aren't any other questions, I'm going to hijack it, subvert the conversation a little, and just a comment to you, Doc. It involves the whole idea of othering and the objectification of it, of the Khoekhoe and the San. This is something, these are themes that have come up in my research quite often as well. Thinking it comes out quite heavily when you read Premier Shalalu's Deaths of Hinsa, where you know, the main protagonist Nicholas Galeka comes, and you know, he even goes over to Britain to try and repatriate the skull of Hinsa, and he is vilified, even made out as being a joke by his own people here in South Africa, when he tries to repatriate the skull in the mid-90s. And this kind of flows over into the research that I'm doing, or did, with regards to my PhD research concerning a land claim in the Eastern Cape, where land claims, as you know, the testimony that is given at these claims aren't necessarily scrutinized in the same kind of measure as a usual civil claim. And so oral testimony is usually given a lot of brevity by the court when dealing with a land claim. And so the number one claimant in the case that I was researching came up with testimony that was unverified, to say the least. But what he was saying, it was from the heart, and he was giving, you know, it looked as if he was speaking of the land that he never saw, but that he felt a part of. He never saw it because his ancestors were pushed off the land before he could see it, and so he was speaking from the mouths of his ancestors and what they had told him. But then when it's put to when it is put to scrutiny, any sort of scrutiny, and especially in cross-examination, his testimony fell apart, and therefore there was that parallel again with the whole with the deaths of Hinsa, with the skull, where it seems that when the regime is tested, when there's any kind of resistance towards the status quo and towards the colonial structures in place, there's almost an unconscious and a conscious reaction to that resistance, which completely undermines that resistance and also attempts to destroy it from people that are supposed to be allied to the resistance. Like I said, not only in Nicholas Galeka's case, but also in the case of the number one claimant in the land claim, his own people were laughing at him. There was laughter in the courthouse when he was giving his testimony. And whether it is unverified or verified, the evidence, it seems to me as if there's this pushback that seems to come almost automatically when the status quo is challenged. And I think that with your work, it goes a long way, and that's why I'm really excited to read it, because I think your work will go a long way in normalizing the resistance, right? And this is extremely important if we are to move away from a colonial discourse, and if we are to go to a position where these kinds of narratives are accepted, and not accepted wholesale or without any sort of scrutiny, but accepted as part of our heritage, as part of our past. So yeah, I just wanted to tell you that this book, I think, will mean quite a lot, not just to researchers in future, and also giving them a kind of inspiration, like I was saying earlier, but also normalizing the resistance that has been othered and has been villainized in the past.
Jaco, thank you very much for that. And I agree with you. Everything that you have said, especially the othering and vilifying people. The one issue that is the most touchy in South Africa, which we have to talk about, is land and the land claim process. And in my book, I didn't touch on it. I think I will, in the current work that I'm doing, I will start thinking about that and include maybe a chapter or two on land. But I can tell you the solution in South Africa is, the one thing is a common African ancestry. And South Africa is not exceptional. What is happening in South Africa is happening across the continent, and it's all locked in the issue around who got land during colonialism and who didn't get land. So the first is then a common African ancestor. Not just ancestor, I mean common African identity. We need that. And then the second thing is we need a common African identity would demand us to share the land. And I think once we as a society in South Africa can get to that conclusion, is that the only way that South Africa as a nation would thrive is on a common African identity where we share the land. Not in terms of ownership and disown, but we share the land equal. There's a lot of people who doesn't have land, and there's a lot of people who have, who could give people land to live out that common African identity. I think only then we will move away from the types of problems that we have. So this is, for me, this is, the solution is so simple, but yet so difficult, because I think what Mzul said is that we don't want to speak about this. There needs to be a discussion and there needs to be a dialogue about it. because once we have that, then all of these land claims, the unverified claim, all of that will vanish, and we'll now start thinking about how can we live together, and that is, I think, a second type of commission, but not a truth and reconciliation commission, but maybe finally a reconciliation commission.
Absolutely, I can't agree with you more. I think that there needs to be some kind of I think South Africans taking that power back for themselves, all South Africans, because in my research, it's surprising at how much pushback there's come from the South African government in terms of land policies, where the land policies have been impeded so badly, not from the usual suspects. I mean, obviously there's pushback from them too, but also from government. And it's not as surprising when you dig deeper and see that it's the land is a profitable project. It's something that and especially in an African context, it's power. Land equates to power and wealth, and to be able to occupy that is to be able to manipulate people in terms of where their votes go, and also to keep them subjugated. And this is a major problem, and I know it's a very cynical view to take, but I think it's a realistic view in terms of the research that I've done, and I'm sure the research that you will be doing, I think you might come to a similar conclusion. And by the way, if you wish to share some knowledge and also wish to get some pointers or anything on the land issue, please feel free to contact me, and we can I can share with you what I have. Okay. Yeah, Doc, thank you so much for this presentation. I think everyone that was involved here unanimously enjoyed this profoundly, and I can't wait to get hold of the book. There's a few messages in the chat box that I'd just like to read to you. The first one is from Ayanda. He says, interesting discussion. The question of human remains is very much complex. Within the context of heritage, as you have mentioned, once the remains are over 100 years, automatically they are fossils. That's quite interesting. And then put through a message. Thank you, Dr. Cloete. My battery is about to die. Your presence and insights added immense value to us, and we truly appreciate your presence. Your book has shed light on important aspects of history that are often overlooked. You have sparked crucial conversations with our academic community. Can't agree more.
Jaco, thank you very much. I will definitely look at your work. I see you read Primesh Lalo's book, The Death of Insa, so I'm already interested. So because me and Primesh had a great conversation on kind of some of the issues in this book when I started it, and he gave me a couple of things to read. So I'll definitely start looking at your work. But thank you very much for inviting me and sharing the space with you guys. I truly appreciate it.
It's only a pleasure, Doc, and thank you, Jacob. Thank you for sacrificing your time on this Wednesday just before public holiday, human rights. I think this is also a great time to also mention that your talk I think comes at the exact right time. I think it coincides with Human Rights Day, And you know, there have been many debates that might have seemed tautologous, to say the least, or obfuscatory, about the debate surrounding whose human rights are we celebrating. And I think, you know, that it goes towards you know, gender rights, gender equality, but also towards ethnicities, especially with the Khoekhoe and the San being not just a marginalized people, but on the brink of extinction. And I think your work that you presented today, I think we can't negate the symbology of and the irony of you delivering this presentation on the eve of Human Rights Day. So thank you for making it possible. I think our timing was absolutely 100%, and thank you for agreeing to it. On that note, colleagues and friends, I'd like to thank everyone who was able to join us today, and we are going to make this recording available, if it's okay with you, Jacob, because I think it's
fine.
Thank you very much. I think it will be so beneficial for those who missed it, and I think it will be really a great introduction for people who might have questioned the whole idea of the seminar for whatever reason. I think this will be a great selling point for it. So thank you very much, colleagues, and we'll, now that you are on the database of this seminar series, we are going to be sending you emails on updates whenever there's another seminar in the future. We will notify you automatically. So thank you. You guys are the originals, the core group that will make the start of what we hope is a very promising seminar series. Thank you very much, Doc, once more.
Thank you, Yoko. Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.
Cheers.
Cheers.